Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here and to share with you my experience of leadership at a more different level than the global or the academic perspective that you've been listening to. I'm here to surprise you a little bit that I may not be talking about the normal leadership or conventional kind of thing that you've heard about. So I hope the talk will not be disappointing. Now, I founded the Hope Development Initiative about 5 years ago, targeting rural-based women and basically focusing on economic empowerment. And like somebody said, I grew up in this community, I studied in this community, and I was one of those privileged girls that got the opportunity to study and went to Britain. And all along, I've been looking for answers and questions around solutions of our problems. And the word leadership keeps coming every other time. Leadership and leadership and leadership. And so that's actually the journey that brought me back 5 years ago and took me to my community. Now, the kind of leadership, as I said, it's really nowhere near the leadership. The leadership we're going to talk about is a leadership under a mango tree. And I hope that these buzzwords of leadership really makes, it means different to different people. And I'm basically here not to tell you about how many female presidents we have in Africa, or how many women members of parliament, or things like that, because in very many conferences, and I really have to thank the university for bringing this transcultural kind of perspective of leadership. Because in many meetings, leadership is about who is in power and who is doing what. And for us feminists, we normally want to count how many numbers are sitting on the table. Now, the leadership I'm talking about today, it is about common sense. It's about helping others to understand their own situation and obligation as well, and the place where they are in the world. And this leadership I'm talking about today is actually about providing services to others. It's about caring. It's about compassion, and it's about modesty. And when you sit back and really ask yourself, so do you consider yourself a leader while sitting here? Of course, in your own perspective, not in mine as well, because mine may be a bit two-way different. And also leadership that generates kind of support for other people. And my context today is actually women. So that's the leadership that I'm going to talk about here today. And I want to talk about this buzzword from my own experience, which started when I was actually 15 years ago. And I recognize my mother as really a great leader. And our leadership stems from really our condition. She gave birth to 8 of us, and we were all girls, I being the firstborn of 8 girls. And in my community, when a woman gives birth to girls, be sure of very serious beatings. And I can see my African colleagues really nodding. So I saw my mother really having the best humiliation in this world of being an outcast of only giving birth to girls. And because girls are really considered very useless people. They're basically just a property for dowry. And if you reach about 13, 14 years, your worth would be done if you bring in some dowry at home. But I witnessed my mother engaging very seriously with her husband and with the community leaders and with other women. And at that time, I didn't even know who decides which child should be born. I didn't actually know at that time, until now that I know it wasn't actually my mother's problem. And so I saw her making an effort to really send us to school against all the odds in the community. Unfortunately, she died just when I was about 16 years old, and she didn't live to see how these useless girls would actually be in the later future. So for me, that defines what I do and what I talk about and what I'm committed to be talking about for some time. From this experience, I see that there are only basically two types of leaders. There is that, trait theory of leadership where they say, oh, this person is a great leader. He has all the traits of leadership. And I was already telling some of the professors and people around here that I think you've got great leaders in your students because you would see that trait in them. But there is also that leadership, which is really a process that you can actually develop it. You can, develop it through interaction. You may not necessarily be a great, a speaker or those traits of leadership. And so for me, the traits theory kind of, influence, the influence, the intelligence that come around with it. But I basically want to focus a little bit more on the process kind of leadership, where you can develop from interaction with people. Now, these processes comes with the leadership style. That was me 5 years ago when these are the Great Women of Development Initiative. And the grassroots approach that I see is basically informed by two different styles of leadership. I know theoretically there may be very many different types, and somebody could be wondering, what is this woman talking about? Now, the styles differ, and it differs from the environment and from the kind of work that you're doing. I'm sure there are very many sessions around leadership styles, but the styles that I'm focusing on today is actually only two, one of it being stewardship and service. But the other is being, supporting and also building the relationship. The stewardship basically focus around serving and leaders choosing, partnership over hierarchy. And if you can look at empowerment over dependency and service to the community above your self-interest, then most probably you're gearing towards the stewardship and the service style of leadership. One other thing I have learned in the years about stewardship or these styles of leadership is that if you are looking for a job, don't go anywhere near thinking of leading or providing services or doing things for others. Because leadership is really a little bit beyond the conventional ways of sitting in the kind of leadership I look at. It's really way beyond that. And the supportive and the relationship building is that it's basically focuses on the individuals or the group capacity to live their values. And this is what I've been doing in my community for the last 5 years. Helping the community to identify their own values, building their capacity in their own knowledge and in their own ways of doing things so that they can be independent and solve their own problems. And so that is the kind of style of leadership that I really look at. Now, looking at all these things, I have to say that not that the hierarchical, the power kind of related relationship are really bad. For example, in the women's leadership, we are proud about the numbers, although it's not yet so good. But we're saying it's also just not about the numbers. It's about, as women, as feminists, identifying those feminist, kind of traits or values that we have and building on them. But also studies and experience have shown that from the household level, women tend to be solution-oriented. I say this with a lot of respect from our gentlemen in the room, that you are great men as well, and you do great work. But really looking at the mother in that house, I don't know mothers maybe in your houses here may be different, but mothers in Africa do so many things. Wake up in the morning, go to the farm. On your way to the farm, you have to carry water. At the same time, you have a child on your back, and you're carrying firewood maybe with a hand, and you're planning to go and make lunch or dinner. So that is the dynamics of the multitasking I'm talking about. I'm not talking about being a secretary or a manager or something, no. That is for me what I really identify as one of those traits that are really amazing. No wonder the reports we are seeing that 67% of the workforce in Africa are actually women, and they do quite a lot of this work. And we're also not talking about that leadership where women are sitting on the table. But I'm looking at how do we then look at the value, not only the numbers of sitting on the table or even sitting under our mango tree, but what value do they bring and the diversity of their experiences and all that. But above all, really making a difference in what they do in their communities. There is also an element around women leadership, which I think is well talked about, and with all the data and evidence, that women are indeed a workforce, an economic workforce in a region where they're providing, particularly in the agriculture sector. In my country, 80% of the labor force in agriculture actually done by women. And so if we see this potential, and we have women, almost 50% of the population of the continent, what does that really mean to us in terms of leadership? And so I think it's really high time that we start looking at discussions around transcultural leadership and women in a broader kind of perspective. In economic perspective, we've talked a lot about the politics, but also we've got now to start talking about their contribution and their values and how we can actually leverage that to improve in whatever work that we do in the region. Talking about their contribution to the economic force and all this, I want to share with you a little bit what motivates women to lead and what actually motivated me personally to go back to my village and do what I do now. One of the things, as I said before, is that women and girls in Africa who have made it through education and through career, we really feel that we are kind of blessed to be here or to be where we are. And so there is that desire to serve and really create a safe environment. And all these years, seeing from my background, from how I've seen my mother and other women in the community struggle with their daily life, that is what really motivated me to go home and see what is it that I can contribute to make this environment and to make the cultures accommodative enough for other girls and women like me. I saw a lot of maternal health issues. Of course, the girl-child education is still a big problem. There are issues around child mortality, and above all, the whole burden of the household on this one woman. And so I thought, let me go home, talk to these women, and then let's decide together what we can actually do together. That's when I started this farming project, because I live in a community where almost 99% are farmers, rural farmers. Very rare that you're getting, because there's no electricity, there's no water. And so you don't expect any factory or anything where people can come and work. So there are no workers, basically. So in terms of those who do business, I'm not a business person. I think the economists would help me that if you went to that community, what would you do? Definitely you're not going to talk about the Google and all that. There are no phones. And so I chose to do what they are best at. And we said, we are going to do the farming, which we were born, and we have lived to know that that is our job, and the job is basically only for food. And I said, okay, if we can get food, get some little money to send our children to school, and have better health care, let's go for it. And so that was really my motivation. Having a business solution, a community-owned solution to our social problems. I come from the northern part of Uganda, and if you saw the second presentation, that's the region which has been in wars, the most intensive one for the last 30 years. But from 1970s, when some of us were being born, we were born during the war. We grew up during the war, and the war is still there. It has just reduced a little bit for the last 5 years. And so it's a community that you really don't, expect investors or anything to come. But for me, that was an opportunity, and it was a motivation to actually give back and see how these women can be empowered and to develop themselves. And they have amazing experiences that they share. And so when we started 20 women to start producing rice for food and for money, at the moment, we are about 10,900 women who have committed to come together to do farming as a business to solve their social problem. So the motivation for women's leadership may be as well different from other motivations of leadership. Others want to be the boss. Others want to be in the politics and all that. So for me, that's really from my experience and what I see in the community, it's basically around the desire to give back and to give an opportunity for other women. As I said, that my perspective and my lens of looking at women's leadership is actually basically really looking beyond the numbers and beyond the women who are at the corporate levels, but more or less going down and looking at what role can we actually play as women, but also to build the, the capacity of the rural women into their own context of leadership. And I think one of the roles that we've got to really focus on is around women's empowerment. I've worked in the development sector for almost 15 years. I've done all these consultancies and really done the readings and the theories about addressing poverty and all these social problems. And as I said, coming from northern Uganda, I've seen all the monies in the world using the aid development approach during emergencies. Not to say we don't need to help during emergencies, it's great work, but how effective is aid development approach for decades that we've had, from world wars and all that? And those are questions that community or grassroots-led kind of leadership got to start looking at more of empowerment. And when you empower a woman, you're sure that you're going to, address the household issues, is going to look after the children, and is going to pay, education and all that kind of things. So I think economic empowerment makes a lot of sense. In the 5 years I've piloted it, and I've seen that when you empower a woman and she gets her own money, however little it is, she will really prioritize education of our children, the health of our children and herself, and of course the livelihood of her household. So I think that's really the other biggest role that we've got to play, and also supporting them, but not forgetting male involvement. 5 years ago, I had a very big clash from the men, from the traditional leaders, and from the political leaders. I was actually being seen as an outsider. They forgot that I was born there, and I grew up there, and I did everything there. But because I came with this, I think to them it's a new culture, it was really a big clash. And that's when we got to learn, and I engaged them at all levels and said, my only approach is to create a space for women to exploit their potential. But also, most of the spaces that are there, women are normally not invited. If they are invited for community meetings, the culture states that the men will sit on the chair in front and the women will sit down behind. Now tell me how somebody sitting down from behind there would actually say something. But also, that person, the woman will not say anything because the culture does not allow her to talk when the husband is there and when the elders are there. So that was the engagement that I had with the men and the traditional leaders. And eventually we agreed that, okay, it's only female, 100% women's organization, but we shall always be coming with our husbands in the meetings. And they loved it because they always want to keep watch of where their women are going and what they're saying. And so it turned out really to be good. So I think in my experience, for the women to really play their role well in communities as leaders, we've really got to involve men to be part of the process that we are looking at. Of course, all these things come with a lot of challenges and barriers, and some of them I've already talked about, the norms and the social constructs around women and leadership. Women are actually not supposed to be leaders anyway in our own norms and cultures. So some of those things are there, but for you to develop women's leadership, then you've got to try to see what approach works better for them. There are a lot of issues around self-esteem and skills for these women, just to mobilize among themselves. Just because they've grown in a community where, standing up to talk is kind of like a taboo and all that. So there's a lot that really impedes them from engaging. And also, some of this community work, it's amazing, they have great results, but very difficult to sustain them. And also very difficult because these women have so many other things to do. And whenever you're doing it, you've got to consider what time is your meeting. If it is a morning, forget about it, because she is committed in her farm. You have to do that only at the time you know that she's got some space, maybe the space to go and collect water or to go and collect firewood for cooking. That is when you can engage, but not more than 1 or 2 hours, because then you would have really, So sustaining them is quite a problem. And of course, the issue of literacy and knowledge about all these things is still a very big challenge. And all this comes because of the inequality issues, the gender-based violence issues, and the poverty issues that are really so rampant in the community. And I think we've already talked about the next steps. My only take on this is that when we talk about leadership, let's try to demystify the conventional approach to leadership and use more of a supportive and a stewardship kind of style of human development. If we are really, to look at leadership in that perspective. I've talked about the empowerment of women and preparing them as well. And I think the community development kind of approach to leadership tends to really cover all the levels of leaders, as opposed to when we only focus on the top level kind of leadership. And also the other thing that I'm really working on is to engage the mothers and so that they can start, talking about these things at a much younger age and talking to the young girls about the role they can play in their own communities. It doesn't matter whether you've gone to school or not. And I think, the opening remarks when the students were talking here, leadership is actually about you. It doesn't matter where you are. So I think it's very critical that we've got to prepare the grounds early enough at that nurturing stage so that the girls grow up with that self-esteem and confidence that they can actually do it. And also embracing the skills and the diversity of humanity in areas that we work and in all these things that we do. And so I hope that my experience and my lens of leadership makes sense. And I really want to end it here by quoting here that you really don't have to hold a position in order to be a leader. You can be a leader wherever you are. You can be a leader wherever you go. And you can be a leader in everything that you do. I thank you very much.